Also about 410 megawatts of CSP, which is concentrated solar power. And I should say that SIA, we work both for large-scale companies, CSP companies, as well as PV. Often, at least here on the East Coast, the conversation and the dialogue is dominated by PV, but CSP is an important part of the market, specifically in the Southwest. Cumulative capacity by state. This kind of gets to the point I was making before. So a couple things going on here in this slide. You can see the number of states that now have a PV capacity that's installed. And it covers all three market segments, really the big chunks of how we describe these markets, both residential, non-residential, and utility scale. Our members and folks in the industry really service all of these. Most of the residential systems are, I think you referred to this, Richard, behind the meter, customer-sited systems. They're what's called often net metering, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Non-residential systems, which might be behind the meter, or they may be outside of that framework. Those are customers that are like your Whole Foods or your BJ's or your universities and colleges and school campuses are customers that fall into that category. And then utility scale. These are the larger projects you might think about. That might be, anywhere from 5 to 10 megawatts to a couple hundred megawatts, some of the larger installations that exist out in the western part of the country. Here in New York State, we refer to utility scale, and sometimes that might be a project that's maybe 10 or 18 megawatts. So relative size to what's going on in other parts of the country might be a little bit smaller, but the framework is the same in that it's a system that's connected at the wholesale level to the grid, and we would call that utility scale for the most part. This is cumulative capacity by state, so let me point that out too. So what we saw on the first slide was what happened last year in 2013 with 4,700 megawatts of PV installations. This slide is showing you how many megawatts we have overall in each of these segments. So for the residential sector, at the end of 2013, we saw around 2,200 megawatts, non-residential 4,000 megawatts total, and then utility scale, of course, at around 6,800 nationwide. We expect this number, the cumulative number, to grow significantly in 2014. Again, I think the projections are somewhere from between 4,000 and 6,000 additional megawatts to be added to the grid this year. In 2013, the additions of 4,700 megawatts made solar the second most, or I always get these adjectives in the wrong order, but the second largest new generation capacity source in the U.S., second only to natural gas. So whereas maybe 15 or 20 years ago, that number might have been a coal facility or some other fossil fuel plant would have been the majority of new generation built in the U.S., now it's natural gas.